Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. When 60-year-old cowboy Harlan Briggs found a dying woman in the frozen foothills, he didn't hesitate. He did what was right. Starved, frostbitten, barely breathing, she couldn't speak her name. Harlan brought her to his cabin, shared his last warm meal, and tended her wounds through the night. By morning, he expected nothing. What he got was 200 mountain warriors standing outside his door, silent and solemn. The woman he saved was their matriarch, thought lost forever. What would a loner cowboy do when faced with an army at dawn? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is a timeless story about courage, compassion, and the bridges we build when we choose kindness over fear. Harlan Briggs woke before dawn, same as he had for the past 40 years. The habit was carved into him deeper than any canyon in the Colorado foothills he called home. His joints protested the cold they always did in early March, and he took his time rising from the narrow bed, allowing his body the dignity of waking slowly. At 60, a man learned to listen to what his bones were telling him. The cabin was small but solid. He'd built it himself 3 decades back, when Sarah was just a girl and his wife Mary was still alive. The logs were chinked tight against the wind, the roof pitched steep to shed snow. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare except for a silver-framed photograph he couldn't quite bring himself to put away. Mary, smiling in her Sunday dress. Sarah, maybe 7 years old, gap-toothed and happy. A different life. He struck a match and coaxed the embers in the fireplace back to flame, added 2 logs from the stack by the door. The coffee pot was already prepared from the night before, grounds and water measured out, ready to set on the iron hook over the fire. While the water heated, Harlan splashed his face from the basin, the water cold enough to make him catch his breath. His reflection in the small mirror showed a face weathered by sun and wind, creased deep around the eyes and mouth. Grey stubble covered his jaw. He'd shave on Saturday, same as always. The worn saddle hung on pegs near the door, leather darkened with age and use, the tree still solid despite decades of weight and weather. He'd bought it with his first real paycheck, back when he was young enough to think a good saddle and a fast horse were all a man needed. He'd been wrong about that, but the saddle had outlasted most everything else. Coffee ready, he poured himself a tin cup and stood at the window watching the sky lighten over the eastern peaks. The thermometer outside read 18 degrees. Cold, but not unusual for this time of year. Snow lay thick on the ground, pristine and unmarked, except for the tracks his cattle made moving between. The barn and the water trough he broke ice from twice daily. He dressed in layers, wool, underwear, flannel shirt, denim jeans worn soft, a heavy canvas coat. Boots he'd resoled himself. Hat he'd owned longer than some men kept wives. Everything had its place, its purpose, nothing wasted, nothing excessive. It was the way he'd lived since Mary passed, the way he'd likely live until his own time came. Outside, the air bit sharp and clean, his breath plumed white in the pre-dawn darkness. Thunder, his buckskin gelding, nickered from the barn, impatient for breakfast. Harlan's boots crunched through the snow as he crossed the yard, the sound loud in the stillness. The barn smelled of hay and horse and the warm breath of his small herd. 6 cattle, thunder, and a barn cat he'd never bothered naming. He forked hay to the cattle first, broke the ice on their water, checked their eyes and coats for signs of trouble. All healthy, all content. Then he measured out grain for thunder, ran his hands over the horse's legs and back, checking for heat or swelling. The gelding was 16, getting up in years himself, but still sound, still reliable. "Just you and me, old son," Harlan murmured, scratching behind Thunder's ears. The horse leaned into his hand, eyes half closed in contentment. The morning routine took 2 hours. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sun had cleared the peaks and the temperature had climbed to maybe 25. He fried eggs and salt pork, toasted bread on the stove, ate standing at the counter. He'd stopped setting the table years ago. No point in it. The day stretched ahead with its familiar tasks. Fences to check along the eastern boundary, firewood to split and stack, harness leather that needed mending. He worked steadily, without hurry, his hands remembering the motions even when his mind wandered. And it wandered often these days, down paths he'd spent years trying to avoid. He thought about Sarah. She'd be 35 now, living in Denver with a husband Harlan had met exactly once, at the wedding 15 years back. They'd stopped calling after the first few years of one-word answers and awkward silences. His fault, mostly. He'd never learned how to talk about the things that mattered, and after Mary died, the words had dried up entirely. Sarah had tried. He'd give her that. She'd driven up for visits, called on holidays, sent photographs of grandchildren he'd never held, but every time, Harlan had kept the conversation short, the visits shorter. Eventually she'd stopped trying. He didn't blame her. The fence line required 3 new posts where the winter snow load had broken through. He worked methodically, digging through frozen ground, setting the posts true, stretching wire tight. Physical labor suited him. It gave his hands something to do and his mind an excuse to go quiet. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up, carrying the promise of more snow. The sky turned the color of old pewter. Thunder grew restless in his pasture, pacing the fence line, ears swiveling toward the high country. Harlan frowned, watching the horse. Animals knew things men didn't. He'd learned that lesson early. He brought Thunder into the barn ahead of schedule, settled the cattle in their stalls. The barn cat appeared from wherever it spent its days and wound between his legs, meowing for attention. Harlan poured kibble into a dented bowl, watched the cat eat with single-minded focus. "Storm coming," he told the cat. "Can feel it in my bones." The cat ignored him, as cats do. Back in the cabin, Harlan lit the lamps and stoked the fire. He heated a can of soup, ate it with crackers, washed his bowl and spoon and set them to dry. Then he settled into his chair with the worn journal he'd kept since Mary passed. He didn't write much, a few lines about the weather, the cattle, small repairs completed. No poetry, no philosophy, just the facts of his days, recorded and forgotten. Tonight, he wrote, March 8th, 18 degrees at dawn, 25 by noon. Fixed fence posts on eastern line, thunder acting nervous, storm moving in from the peaks. All stock secure. He closed the journal and set it aside, then reached for the book on the side table. Louis L'Amour, a story about hard men in a hard land. He'd read it before, but the words were comfortable, familiar. He read for an hour, maybe 2, until his eyes grew heavy and the fire burned low. Before bed, he made one last check outside. The wind had strengthened, driving snow sideways across the yard. The temperature was dropping fast. He could barely make out the barn through the white curtain of the storm. Everything battened down, everything secure, nothing to worry about. But as he turned back toward the cabin, thunder screamed, a sound of alarm Harlan hadn't heard in years. He froze, listening. The wind howled, the snow fell, and somewhere out in the darkness, something was wrong. He stood at the door for a long moment, his hand on the frame, every instinct telling him to pay attention. Thunder didn't spook easy. Whatever had set him off was real, but the storm was too thick, the darkness too complete. Morning would be soon enough to investigate. He was 60 years old, and the days of running into trouble in the middle of a blizzard were behind him. He closed the door, barred it, and went to bed. But sleep came slow, and when it came, it brought dreams of Mary, of Sarah as a little girl, of all the words he'd never said, and all the years he'd spent alone. Outside, the storm raged on, and thunder paced his stall. And in the frozen foothills 3 miles away, a woman lay dying in the snow, clutching a wooden cross and a medicine pouch, whispering prayers no one could hear. The world was about to change for Harlan Briggs. He just didn't know it yet. The alarm he'd set in his mind woke him at 5, same as always. He lay in the darkness, listening to the storm batter the cabin walls. Still blowing. Hard. He'd wait until first light before venturing out, use the time to make coffee and let his body wake proper. no sense rushing into a whiteout. By 6, the sky had lightened enough to see the damage. Snow had drifted 4 feet deep against the barn door. The wind had torn loose a section of roof on the equipment shed. But the cabin was tight, the barn solid, and thunder had settled down, which eased the knot in Harlan's chest. He dressed for the weather, every layer he owned, plus oilskin over it all. He tied a rope from the cabin door to the barn door, an old safety measure from his early years in the high country. In a whiteout, a man could get lost between his house and his horse, freeze to death 10 feet from shelter. He'd known it to happen. The cattle were restless but unharmed. Thunder wickered a greeting, then turned his attention back to the hay net, which told Harlan whatever had spooked him was past. Animals lived in the present. Men were the ones who borrowed trouble from tomorrow. He spent the morning digging out, clearing paths, checking for damage. The physical work felt good, gave him something to do besides think. By noon, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world scoured, clean and white, the sky a blue so sharp it hurt to look at directly. That's when he noticed the tracks. They led in from the east, from the high country, already half filled with snow but still visible. Not deer, not elk. Something that walked on 2 legs, stumbling and falling and getting up again, heading downslope toward the valley. The tracks were a day old at least, maybe more. Harlan stood at the edge of his property studying the trail. None of his business. Could be a hunter who'd gotten turned around. Probably made it to Cedar Ridge by now. Could be someone who knew what they were doing and didn't need help from a stranger. Could be a lot of things that didn't concern him. He turned back toward the cabin, took 3 steps, and stopped. Thunder was watching him from the barn door, ears forward. The horse knew. Harlan looked back at the tracks, at the way they wandered and fell, at the desperate pattern of someone in real trouble. "Damn it," he said to no one. He went back to the barn and saddled Thunder, packed his saddlebags with emergency supplies, blankets, water, first aid kit, rope, told himself he'd follow the tracks for a mile, maybe 2, just to be sure. If he didn't find anything, he'd turn back and let it be. That was reasonable. That was enough. He mounted up and pointed Thunder toward the high country, following the tracks as they climbed into the foothills. The horse moved carefully through the deep snow, finding solid footing, and Harlan gave him his head, trusting the animal's instincts over his own. 1 mile became 2. 2 became 3. The tracks grew more erratic, the falls more frequent. Whoever had made them was in bad shape, getting worse with every step. And then Thunder stopped and refused to go. Forward, tossing his head and backing up, eyes rolling white. Harlan had learned long ago to trust his horse. He dismounted and went forward on foot, following Thunder's sightline to a tumble of rocks at the base of a small cliff. That's where he found her. She was small and still, half buried in snow that had drifted against the rocks. If not for the dark fabric of her coat, he might have walked right past her. Harlan knelt beside her, pulled off his glove, and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Pulse, faint but there. He said a quiet word of thanks to whoever might be listening. Her face was the color of old paper, lips blue with cold. Native American features, strong cheekbones, silver-black hair braided and frozen stiff. Late 50s, maybe 60. She wore good clothes, a wool coat, sturdy boots, layers underneath, but they'd been no match for the storm. Her right hand clutched something tight against her chest, fingers frozen in place around whatever it was. Harlan worked, quickly. He checked her extremities, feet and hands, already showing the waxy white of deep frostbite. Her breathing was shallow, irregular, hypothermia, advanced. She needed warmth, needed it now, or she'd be past helping. He pulled the emergency blanket from his saddlebag, wrapped her carefully, then lifted her as gently as he could. She weighed almost nothing, light as a child in his arms. Close up, he could see the wooden cross hanging around her neck on a leather cord, worn smooth with age. Her frozen hand still gripped whatever she was holding. He could see beadwork between her fingers, colors bright against the snow. Thunder stood steady as Harlan lifted the woman onto the saddle, then climbed up behind her, settling her against his chest to share what warmth he had. The horse understood without being told. They started back down the mountain, slow and careful, while Harlan held the woman close and watched for signs of consciousness. She stirred once, mumbled something he couldn't understand. Not English, not Spanish. Something older, syllables that rose and fell like water over stones. Her eyes opened briefly, dark brown, unfocused, then closed again. Her breathing hitched and steadied. "Hold on," Harlan told her. "Not much farther now." The ride back took twice as long as the ride out. Thunder placed each step with care, testing the snow before committing his weight. Harlan kept one arm around the woman, the other on the reins, and tried not to think about how cold she felt, even through all the layers between them. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was low and the temperature dropping fast. He dismounted carefully, lifted the woman down, and carried her inside. The fire had burned low, but the cabin was still warm. He laid her on his bed, began the slow process of removing her wet clothes, replacing them with dry blankets. Her skin was ice to the touch. He'd learned field medicine in the army a lifetime ago. Knew that warming someone too fast could kill them as sure as the cold itself. So he worked slowly, methodically, wrapped her feet and hands in dry cloth, packed them loosely to protect the frostbitten tissue. Got warm, not hot water into her, a spoonful at a time, watching to make sure she could swallow. Built the fire up to take the chill off the room, but not overheat it. When she was settled, he finally pried her hand open to see what she'd been holding. A small pouch, deerskin by the look of it, decorated with intricate beadwork geometric patterns in red and white and blue. He could smell sage and sweetgrass. Inside were herbs he didn't recognize, small stones, what might have been tobacco, a medicine bundle, sacred probably. He set it on the table beside the wooden cross he'd removed from around her neck, both items within her sight when she woke. If she woke, the evening passed in vigil. Harlan sat in his chair by the fire, checking on her every few minutes. Her breathing improved, grew deeper, and more regular. The blue faded from her lips. Color returned slowly to her cheeks. But she didn't wake, didn't speak, just lay wrapped in blankets and lost in whatever place the cold had taken her. He heated soup and ate it without tasting, his attention on the woman in his bed. Every instinct told him to ride to Cedar Ridge, fetch Doc Mercer, get her proper medical care. But the storm had started up again, snow falling thick outside the window. Nobody was going anywhere tonight. So he kept watch, added logs to the fire, checked her pulse and breathing, changed the cloth on her hands and feet, examining them for signs the frostbite was spreading. They looked bad, but not as bad as they could have been. She might lose some fingers, maybe toes, but she'd live. Probably. He tried not to think about who she was, where she'd come from, why she'd been alone in the high country during a storm. None of his concern. His job was to keep her alive until morning, then figure out what came next. But his mind wandered anyway, down paths he didn't want to follow. She reminded him of Mary, just in the vulnerability of her, the trust required to lie unconscious in a stranger's care. He remembered nights sitting up with Sarah when she had croup, the helpless terror of watching his child struggle to breathe, the fierce protective instinct that came from nowhere and changed everything. He'd thought those feelings had died with Mary, gotten buried under years of solitude and silence. Turned out they'd just been sleeping. Near midnight, the woman stirred. Her eyes opened, focused on nothing, and she spoke again in that language he didn't know. She seemed agitated, reaching for something, and Harlan moved quickly to her side, showed her the medicine pouch and the cross. "Here," he said quietly, "I kept them safe for you." She took the pouch, pressed it to her heart, and closed her eyes. Her breathing eased. Whatever she'd needed to know, she knew now. "You're safe here," Harlan told her, though he had no idea if she understood. "Rest now." She slept again, deeper this time, and Harlan returned to his chair. The fire crackled. The storm blew itself out against the cabin walls. And somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, while Harlan dozed in his chair, thunder began to pace his stall again. The horse knew something Harlan didn't. Something was coming. Harlan woke to Thunder's screaming, the same sound of alarm from the night before. He was on his feet before he was fully conscious, muscle memory from his military days taking over. Dawn light leaked grey through the window. The storm had passed. Everything should have been quiet. He grabbed his rifle from over the door and stepped outside into the cold morning air. Thunder was at the fence, head high, nostrils flared. Not afraid, exactly. Alert, warning. That's when Harlan saw them. They stood in a line along the ridge above his property, silhouetted against the rising sun. 50 men, maybe more, spread out in formation, perfectly still, perfectly silent. As Harlan watched, more appeared, filling in the gaps, extending the line north and south until they circled his entire property. 100 men, 150, more still coming. They wore a mix of modern and traditional clothing, canvas, coats over buckskin, wool hats and fur, rifles slung over shoulders. Their faces were dark and weathered, expressions unreadable at this distance. They didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there, watching. Harlan's hands were steady on his rifle, but his heart hammered against his ribs. He did a quick count. 200 men, give or take, all armed, all looking at his cabin like they had business here. This had something to do with the woman. Had to be. Nothing else made sense. He stood his ground, rifle held ready but not aimed, and waited. In his experience, the first man to move usually regretted it. Better to hold position, see what they wanted, and not do anything that might be taken wrong. The sun climbed higher. The wind picked up. Thunder paced his fence line. And the warriors on the ridge stood motionless as the stones beneath their feet, waiting for something Harlan didn't understand. Then the line parted, and an old man stepped through. He was ancient, this old man, his face a map of deep lines and hard years. He walked with a staff carved from mountain ash, each step deliberate and sure despite his age. The warriors remained motionless as he descended the slope toward Harlan's cabin, alone and unarmed except for the staff. Harlan waited, rifle still in his hands, but lowered now. This was a parley, not an attack. You didn't send an elder out front if you meant violence. The old man stopped 20 feet away, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to maintain dignity. His eyes were black and sharp, missing nothing, not the rifle, not Harlan's posture, not the tension in Thunder's stance. He studied Harlan for a long moment, then spoke in accented but clear English. "You have someone who belongs to us." Harlan nodded slowly. "Woman came wandering out of the high country. Found her near frozen. She's inside, still recovering. She lives? She lives." Something shifted in the old man's face, relief, profound and unmistakable. He closed his eyes briefly, lips moving in what might have been prayer, then looked at Harlan again with new intensity. "You have our gratitude," he said. "We have been searching for 3 days. We thought her lost. Who is she?" The old man's grip tightened on his staff, the only sign of the emotion beneath his composed exterior. "She is Ayana, our clan mother, our teacher, the keeper of our stories and our medicine. When she disappeared, we feared the worst." Harlan processed this. A matriarch, then. Someone important, someone whose loss would have devastated an entire community. He glanced back at the cabin, thinking of the small woman lying in his bed, clutching her medicine pouch like a lifeline. How'd she end up alone in a storm? "She went into the high places to pray and seek guidance," the elder said. "It is her way, has been for 40 years, but this time she did not return. We tracked her through the storm, but the snow covered her trail. We thought," he stopped, gathered himself. "We thought the mountain had claimed her." "Nearly did," Harlan said. "Another few hours and I'd have found nothing but a body." The old man's eyes studied him with new interest. "Why did you bring her home? She is not your people, not your concern." It was a fair question. Harlan thought about it, about Thunder's warning and his own reluctant decision to follow those tracks into the storm. About the way his hands had moved without thought, doing what needed doing. "Couldn't leave her to die," he said simply. "Wouldn't sit right." The elder nodded as if this answer satisfied something. You are a man of honor. Your actions speak what your few words do. Not. He tapped his staff against the ground, and the line of warriors on the ridge shifted, their posture easing slightly. Still watchful, but no longer coiled for action. I am Thomas Running Bear, the elder continued. These are our people, from the valleys and high camps. We have lived in these mountains since before your grandfathers' grandfathers walked this land. We keep to ourselves. We ask nothing of outsiders. But today, we are in your debt. Harlan shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the formality. No debt. I did what anyone would do. You did what few would do, Thomas corrected gently. And so there is debt, whether you accept it or not. May I see her? Harlan considered the request. 200 armed men on his property, their leader asking politely to enter his home. Not much of a choice, really. But something in Thomas's demeanor suggested the request was genuine, not a veiled demand. Come on then, Harlan said, and led the way to the cabin. Inside, Thomas moved to the bedside with the careful reverence of someone approaching something sacred. Ayana lay still, wrapped in blankets, her breathing slow and steady. Her medicine pouch rested on her chest where Harlan had placed it. Thomas knelt beside the bed, touched her forehead gently, then her hands, examining the frostbite damage with knowing eyes. She will heal, he said quietly. Thanks to you. Fingers might not all make it, Harlan said. The toes, maybe one or two as well. I did what I could, but frostbite's got its own mind about things. She will consider it a small price for her life. Thomas stood, faced Harlan directly. You have given us back something irreplaceable. There must be balance. What would you ask of us? The question caught Harlan off guard. Nothing. I don't want anything. Then you will have our protection, our respect, and our help should you ever need it, Thomas said firmly. These are not small things in a hard land. Harlan didn't know what to say to that. He'd lived alone for 15 years, asked nothing of anyone, wanted no entanglements. But looking at Thomas's weathered face, at the absolute sincerity there, he understood refusing would be an insult. All right, he said. Thomas nodded, satisfied. We will make camp at a respectful distance. When Ayana is ready to travel, we will take her home. Until then, if you need anything, food, medicine, firewood, you have only to ask. I'm set for supplies. Nevertheless, Thomas moved toward the door, paused. You are alone here. I am. That is a hard way to live. It's my way. Thomas studied him with those sharp black eyes, seeing more than Harlan wanted seen. Yes, I think I understand, but perhaps the mountain has other plans. He gestured toward Ayana with his staff. She sought guidance in the high places. Perhaps this is the answer she found. I'm no answer to anything, Harlan said. We shall see. Thomas stepped outside, raised his staff, and the podada. Warriors on the ridge began to move, flowing down the slopes toward the valley beyond Harlan's property, setting up camp with practiced efficiency. Within an hour, smoke rose from cooking fires, and the smell of roasting meat drifted on the wind. Harlan stood at his door, watching 200 strangers make themselves at home in his valley, and wondered what in God's name he'd gotten himself into. Inside the cabin, Ayana stirred and opened her eyes for the first time since Harlan had found her. She looked around the unfamiliar room, saw the rough-hewn walls and simple furnishings, felt the warmth of the fire and the weight of blankets. Her gaze found Harlan standing at the door, then moved to the medicine pouch on her chest. She lifted it with her bandaged hands, pressed it to her lips, and spoke one word in her native tongue. Then, in halting English, "Thank you." Harlan nodded, not trusting his voice. It had been a long time since anyone had thanked him for anything. He'd forgotten what it felt like. "You need water?" he asked. "Something to eat?" She nodded, and Harlan busied himself with the simple tasks of hospitality, aware of her eyes on him, aware of the weight of 200 warriors camped in his valley, aware that his life, his careful, solitary, manageable life had just become something else entirely. Change had come to Harlan Briggs, whether he wanted it or not. And deep down, in a place he'd kept locked for 15 years, something stirred and whispered that maybe, just maybe, he'd been waiting for this all along. Ayana's recovery came slowly, measured in small victories. The first day, she managed to sit up and take broth. The second, she spoke a few words in English, simple but clear. By the third day, she could stand with help, though the frostbite damage made walking painful. Harlan tended her with quiet efficiency, the same way he tended his cattle and his horse. No fuss, no unnecessary words. But Ayana watched him with those sharp, dark eyes, seeing past his gruff exterior to something underneath. She thanked him constantly for water, for food, for adjusting her blankets until finally he had to ask her to stop. "No need for all that," he said, uncomfortable with the attention. "There is every need," she replied in her careful English. "You gave me back my life. That deserves acknowledgement." He didn't know how to argue with that, so he didn't try. Thomas came each morning to check on her, accompanied by different members of the clan. They brought gifts, smoked venison, dried berries, herbs for healing, a thick fur blanket. Harlan tried to refuse, but Ayana fixed him with a look that reminded him of his mother 30 years gone, and he accepted with as much grace as he could manage. The younger men helped with chores without being asked. He'd step outside to find his woodpile, doubled in size, his barn mucked clean, fence posts he'd been meaning to replace already standing straight and true. They worked in silence, nodded respectfully when he thanked them, and faded back to their camp without lingering. It made him uneasy. All this attention and help. He'd grown accustomed to solitude, to being responsible only for himself and his animals. Having 200 people treating him like some kind of hero felt wrong, excessive. He was just a man who'd done what was right, nothing more. But they didn't see it that way. On the fourth day, a young woman came to the cabin carrying a basket of bread and preserves. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long black hair and her mother's or maybe grandmother's high cheekbones. "I am Elena," she said, "Thomas's granddaughter. I wanted to thank you for saving Ayana. She taught me everything I know about healing plants and medicine ways." "You're welcome," Harlan said, accepting the basket because refusing seemed rude. Elena hesitated at the door, then said, "May I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Why do you live?" "Alone? A man like you, strong, capable, kind, you should have family, grandchildren. Why do you choose solitude?" The question hit harder than he expected. He looked past her to where thunder grazed in the pasture, buying himself time to answer. "Had family once," he said finally. "Wife died 15 years back. Daughter grew up and moved on. After a while, being alone just seemed easier." "Easier," Elena repeated, as if testing the word. "But is it better?" He had no answer for that, and after a moment Elena nodded as if he'd said something profound. "Sometimes we think we choose our paths," she said, "but maybe our paths choose us. Maybe the mountain brought Ayana here not just to be saved, but to bring you back to the world." She left before he could tell her she was wrong. Inside, Ayana was sitting up in bed, working on a piece of beadwork despite her bandaged fingers. The work was intricate, delicate red and white patterns forming shapes Harlan didn't recognize, but found beautiful nonetheless. "That's fine work," he said, setting the basket on the table. "My hands remember even when they hurt," she replied. "It helps to have something to do besides lay here and think." He understood that. Idle hands, idle mind, that's when the past came knocking. "What are you making?" She held up the partially finished piece, a bracelet, by the look of it. "A gift. For the man who saved my life." "You don't need to do that." "I know." She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "That is why I want to." Over the following days, Harlan found himself pulled into the rhythm of the camp. Men came to help with his evening chores, and he'd find himself listening to their stories, tales of hunts and hard winters, of family gatherings and seasonal ceremonies. They asked about his cattle, his land, his years in the valley, and he answered with more words than he'd spoken in months. Thomas visited most evenings, bringing tea made from mountain herbs that tasted of pine and wildflower. They'd sit by the fire while Ayana dozed, and Thomas would tell stories of the old days, how his people had lived in these mountains for centuries, moving with the seasons, respecting the land, keeping the old ways alive, even as the world changed around them. "We are few now," Thomas said one night. "Once we numbered in the thousands, now 200, but we endure. We remember, and we protect what is ours." "Must be hard," Harlan said, "keeping traditions alive when the world wants you to forget." "It is the only fight worth having." Thomas sipped his tea. "You understand this, I think. You keep your own traditions, solitude, self-reliance, the cowboy way. You hold to what you know, even when it costs you." "Maybe," Harlan allowed. "There is honor in that. But honor can become a cage if we are not careful." Thomas set down his cup. "Ayana says you have a daughter, that you do not speak." Harlan stiffened. "That's personal business." "Yes, and it hurts you. I can see it in your eyes when you think no one is watching." Thomas leaned forward. "Among our people, family is everything. When there is a rift, we work to heal it. Pride is less important than connection. Some things can't be healed, perhaps, but have you tried?" The question sat heavy in the silence between them. Harlan stared into the fire, thinking of Sarah's last visit, the awkward conversation, the relief on both their faces when she finally left. He told himself it was better this way, cleaner, less painful. But sitting here now, surrounded by evidence of what family and community could mean, he wondered if he'd been lying to himself all along. "I wouldn't know what to say," he admitted quietly. "Start with the truth," Thomas said. "Tell her you miss her. Tell her you're sorry. Tell her you'd like to try again. The words will come if the intention is pure." Ayana stirred then, ending the conversation. But Thomas's words stayed with Harlan long after the old man had returned to camp. They rattled around in his head as he checked the animals, as he lay in his makeshift bed by the fire, as he stared at the ceiling and thought about the telephone in Cedar Ridge he'd used exactly twice in 15 years. Maybe it was time to make it 3 times, but not yet. First, he needed to figure out what to say, and after 15 years of silence, that was going to take some thought. Outside, the camp settled into nighttime quiet. Cook fires burned low, voices murmured in the darkness. And somewhere in the valley, a flute played a melody that sounded like wind through canyon stones, beautiful and lonely and achingly familiar. Harlan closed his eyes and listened, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone. By the end of the first week, Ayana could walk without assistance, though she still tired easily. The frostbite was healing better than Harlan had hoped. She'd lose parts of 2 fingers on her left hand and the tip of 1 toe, but the rest would recover fully. Thomas brought a medicine woman from the camp, an elderly woman named Morning Star, who treated the damaged tissue with poultices that smelled of sage and something sharper, more astringent. "Old medicine," Morning Star said when Harlan asked what was in the mixture. "Stronger than your doctor's pills. The plants remember how to heal." He didn't argue. The swelling was going down, the tissue looked healthier. Whatever was in those poultices was working. But as Ayana grew stronger, Harlan felt himself growing restless. The camp had been in his valley for a week now, and while the warriors kept their distance and caused no trouble, their presence weighed on him. He wasn't used to people, to conversation, to the constant awareness that he was being watched, evaluated, judged. One morning he saddled Thunder and rode out to check his far fence lines, grateful for the solitude. The mountain air was sharp and clean, the silence broken only by wind and the creak of saddle leather. This was his world, just him and the horse, and the land stretching out forever. But when he returned at midday, he found Thomas waiting on his porch, and something in the old man's posture told him this wasn't a social call. "We need to talk," Thomas said. Harlan dismounted, tied Thunder to the rail. "About what? About what comes next?" Thomas gestured toward the camp. "My people cannot stay here forever. We have responsibilities, territories to tend, ceremonies to prepare for. Ayana is strong enough to travel now. It is time for us to go home. Relief flooded through Harlan, followed immediately by something else, something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment. He pushed it away. "That's probably for the best," he said. "But before we go, there is a matter to settle." Thomas's expression grew serious. "You have done us a great service. By our customs, this creates an obligation. We would ask you to come to our village, to be honored properly before the full council, to receive the gifts and recognition you are due." "That's not necessary." "It is necessary," Thomas interrupted, voice firm. "Not for you, for us. We are a people of honor. We pay our debts. To refuse this would shame us and dishonor what you have done." Harlan felt trapped. He wanted no honors, no ceremonies, no further entanglement, but he could see Thomas was serious, that this wasn't a request he could easily decline without causing offense. How long would it take? 2 days. 1 to travel to our village, 1 for the ceremony, and 1 to return. Thomas read his hesitation. "I know this is uncomfortable for you. I know you prefer solitude. But sometimes we must do what is right, even when it is hard. You understand this. It is why you saved Ayana in the first place. The old man had him there. Harlan had followed those tracks into the storm because it was the right thing to do, even though every instinct told him to turn back. This was the same, doing what was right, even when it felt wrong. "All right," he said. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn." Thomas clasped his shoulder, a gesture of respect and gratitude. "You honor us with your acceptance." After Thomas left, Harlan stood on his porch and stared at the mountains, feeling the weight of his decision. 2 days. He could manage 2 days. Then life would return to normal, the camp would disperse, and he'd be alone again. But that night, lying in his makeshift bed by the fire while Ayana slept in the other room, he found himself unable to sleep. Images kept surfacing: Sarah as a little girl, learning to ride Thunder's predecessor. Mary, laughing at some joke he'd long forgotten. The photograph on the mantel, frozen in time, a record of happiness he'd once known and let slip away. Thomas's words echoed, "Sometimes we must do what is right even when it is hard." What was right? Staying alone in this cabin, safe from hurt and disappointment? Or reaching out, trying again, risking the pain of rejection for the possibility of connection? He didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. The next morning came cold and clear. Harlan packed light bedroll, spare clothes, jerky and hardtack. He made arrangements for his cattle with one of the younger warriors, a quiet man named Joseph, who had helped with chores all week. "I'll check them morning and evening," Joseph promised. "They'll be treated like my own." Ayana emerged from the cabin, wearing traditional dress buckskin, decorated with intricate beadwork, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked regal, powerful, every inch the matriarch Thomas had described. The bandages on her hands were gone now, replaced by delicate wrappings that allowed her fingers to move freely. She approached Harlan and held out her hands. In them was the bracelet she'd been making, finished now, the beadwork forming a pattern of mountains and sky. "For you," she said simply. Harlan took it, felt the weight of it, the craftsmanship in every bead. "It's beautiful. But you didn't need—" "Hush," she smiled. "Sometimes we give gifts not because we must, but because we want to. Accept it with grace." He slipped it over his wrist. The fit was perfect. "Thank you, thank you," she replied, and her eyes held depths of meaning he couldn't quite read. The journey to the village took most of the day. They traveled north and west into high country Harlan had never explored, following trails only the mountain people knew. The landscape grew wilder, more remote, until they descended into a hidden valley where the village spread across a meadow beside a clear-running stream. It was larger than Harlan expected, maybe 30 permanent structures, a mix of traditional tipis and modern cabins, with outdoor cooking areas and corrals for horses. Children played in the snow. Women worked over fires. Men tended weapons and tools. It looked like any small community, except for the integration of old and new, traditional and modern, that gave it a unique character. Their arrival caused a stir. People emerged from dwellings, called out greetings, surrounded Ayana with gentle affection. She spoke to them in her native language, gestured toward Harlan, and the crowd turned to study him with curious eyes. Thomas raised his staff for silence. "This is Harlan Briggs," he announced in English, then repeated it in his own tongue. "He saved our matriarch when she was lost and dying. He gave her shelter, healing, and protection. He is our honored guest." The crowd parted, and an elder woman stepped forward, older even than Thomas, her face a map of the deepest lines Harlan had ever seen. She moved with difficulty, leaning heavily on a younger woman's arm, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Grandmother Willow," Thomas said quietly. "Our eldest. She wishes to speak with you." The old woman studied Harlan for a long moment, then spoke, in a voice like dry leaves rustling. Thomas translated, "She says you carry sadness like a stone in your heart. She says the mountain has brought you here not just to be honored, but to be healed. Will you allow this?" Harlan met her ancient gaze, saw wisdom there that went beyond words. He thought of Mary, of Sarah, of 15 years spent running from pain by refusing to feel anything at all. "I don't know how," he said honestly. Grandmother Willow nodded as if this answer pleased her. She spoke again, and Thomas translated, "The first step is always the hardest, but you have already taken it by coming here. The rest will follow if you allow it." She touched his hand, a brief gesture of blessing, then turned and was helped back toward one of the cabins. The crowd dispersed, returning to their tasks, and Harlan found himself standing beside Ayana and Thomas, feeling exposed and uncertain. "What did she mean about being healed?" he asked. "Grandmother Willow sees more than most," Ayana said. "She saw the same thing. Thomas and I have seen a good man imprisoned by grief, choosing solitude because it feels safer than risking connection. She wants to help you find your way back. I'm not lost. Aren't you?" Her question was gentle, not accusing. "When was the last time you were truly happy, Harlan? Not just content, not just surviving. Happy?" He couldn't answer. The silence stretched between them, filled with truths he didn't want to face. Finally, Thomas said, "Come, let us show you where you will sleep. Tomorrow is the ceremony. Tonight, rest and think, that is all we ask." They led him to a small guest cabin, warm and comfortable, stocked with firewood and provisions. Harlan unpacked his few things and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bracelet on his wrist. Outside, the village settled into evening routines. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children's laughter echoed across the meadow. And somewhere in the distance, that same haunting flute played its lonely melody. Harlan closed his eyes and thought about happiness, about family, about a daughter he'd pushed away because it was easier than dealing with the pain of missing her mother. Maybe Grandmother Willow was right. Maybe he was lost. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to find his way home. Harlan woke to the sound of drums, not loud, but steady, rhythmic, carrying across the valley like a heartbeat. Dawn light filtered through the cabin window, painting the walls gold and amber. For a moment he didn't remember where he was. Then it all came back, the journey, Grandmother Willow's penetrating gaze, Ayana's question that had kept him awake half the night. He dressed and stepped outside. The village was already awake, people moving with purpose toward the large circle at the center of the meadow. A fire had been built there, big enough to see from anywhere in the valley, and around it the ground had been swept clean and prepared. Elena appeared at his elbow, carrying a bowl of something that smelled like cornmeal and honey. "You should eat," she said. "The ceremony will be long." He took the bowl, grateful. "What exactly happens at this ceremony?" "You will be honored before the council, given gifts, and welcomed as a friend to our people." She paused. "But also, if you are willing, Grandmother Willow will perform a healing. Not of body, but of spirit." "I didn't agree to that." "No, but she will offer, and you may choose to accept or decline. No pressure, no judgment." Elena met his eyes. "We believe that all healing requires consent. Force helps no one." After breakfast, Thomas came to fetch him. The old man looked formal today, dressed in traditional regalia, buckskin shirt decorated with quillwork, a headdress of eagle feathers, ceremonial moccasins. He carried his staff and moved with solemn dignity. "It is time," he said simply. They walked together to the circle where the council had assembled. 7 elders sat on benches arranged in a semicircle around the fire. Grandmother Willow occupied the center position, flanked by 3 on each side. Behind them, the entire village had gathered 200 people watching in respectful silence. Thomas led Harlan to stand before the council. The drums fell silent. Grandmother Willow stood with effort, leaning on her staff, and began to speak. Her voice was stronger now, carrying across the circle with surprising power. Thomas translated as she spoke, "We gather today to honor a debt and to recognize courage. Harlan Briggs, a man not of our people, found our matriarch dying in the snow. He did not hesitate. He did not ask what reward might come. He simply did what was right. He brought Ayanna to his home, shared his food and warmth, tended her wounds through the night. Because of him, she lives. Because of him, our community remains whole." The council members stood as one, and the village followed. The silence was profound, respectful. Harlan felt heat rise in his cheeks, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to deny the sincerity of it. "For this act of compassion," Grandmother Willow continued, "we name you Friend of the People. You will always have safe passage in our lands. Our homes are your homes. Our protection is your protection. When you need help, you have only to ask. This is our promise, witnessed by all, binding forever." One by one, the council members came forward with gifts. A hunting knife, beautifully crafted with a bone handle. A blanket woven in traditional patterns, a pouch of sacred herbs, a painting on hide depicting mountains and sky. Each gift was presented with words of thanks and respect, and Harlan accepted them all, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. Finally, Thomas stepped forward, carrying something wrapped in soft deerskin. He unfolded it to reveal a vest made from white buckskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns that matched the bracelet Ayanna had made. "This was made by Ayanna herself," Thomas said. "Every bead placed by her hands, even injured as they were. She worked on it every day since she could hold a needle. It represents her gratitude, but also her blessing. Wear it and know you are valued, respected, and remembered." Harlan took the vest, felt the weight of it, the hours of labor and care that had gone into its creation. He looked across the circle to where Ayanna stood, and she nodded, smiling through tears. "Thank you," he managed. "All of you. I don't have words." "You do not need words," Grandmother Willow said. "Your actions spoke for you. Now, if you are willing, I would offer you something more, a different kind of gift." She gestured to the space before the fire, and 2 young men brought out a low bench, placed it carefully. "We have ceremonies for many things," Grandmother Willow explained through Thomas. "For birth and death, for marriage and coming of age, but also for healing, not just of body, but of heart and spirit. I sense great grief in you, held tight and close. Grief for your wife, yes, but also for lost time, lost connection with your daughter, lost years you can never recover. This grief serves no purpose now. It only binds you to the past and prevents you from living in the present." Harlan's first instinct was to refuse, to deflect, to retreat behind the walls he'd built over 15 years. But something in Grandmother Willow's face, the compassion there, the understanding, stopped him. "What would this healing involve?" he asked. "You would sit before the fire. I would lead you through a prayer of release, asking the spirits to help you let go of what no longer serves you. The council would witness and support you. That is all. No magic, no mystery. Just honest intention and community witness. And if I refuse, then you refuse. We will honor your choice and think no less of you." She smiled, and despite her age, the smile was radiant. "But I think you did not come all this way, accept all these gifts, stand before all these people, only to leave carrying the same burden you arrived with. I think part of you wants to be free." The words hit like a physical blow because they were true. He did want to be free. Wanted to stop carrying Mary's death like a punishment. Wanted to reach out to Sarah without the weight of 15 years of silence, making it impossible. Wanted to wake up in the morning and feel something other than resignation and routine. "All right," he said quietly. "I'm willing." The drums began again, softer now, a gentle pulse like a heartbeat. Grandmother Willow motioned for him to sit on the bench. He did, feeling exposed and vulnerable with 200 eyes watching. The old woman moved to stand before him, placed both hands on his head, and began to chant in her native language. Harlan didn't understand the words, but he felt the intention behind them: release, forgiveness, peace. The chant rose and fell, joined by other voices from the council, then the wider circle, until the whole village was singing, the sound washing over him in waves. Grandmother Willow spoke in English now. "Harlan Briggs, you loved your wife well, you mourn her still. This is right, but mourning should not be a prison. She would not want you to live half a life in her memory. Honor her by living fully, by opening your heart again, by reconnecting with your daughter who needs you still." Tears came then, hot and unexpected, streaming down his weathered cheeks. He didn't try to stop them, couldn't have if he tried. All the grief he'd held in for 15 years came pouring out, and the village sang through it, supported him through it, witnessed his pain without judgment. "Let it go," Grandmother Willow whispered. "Let it all go." And somehow, in that moment, surrounded by strangers who had become something more, Harlan did. The ceremony lasted an hour, maybe more. When it ended, Harlan felt hollowed out, exhausted, but also lighter than he'd felt in years. The weight he'd carried had eased, not gone. Grief never really left, but manageable now, no longer crushing. People came forward one by one, touching his shoulder, offering quiet words of support. Ayana hugged him fiercely despite her injured hands. Elena brought him water and food. Thomas sat beside him and said nothing, just offered silent companionship while Harlan gathered himself. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, Grandmother Willow approached again. She looked tired but satisfied. "You did well," she said. "The first step is always the hardest. Now comes the next step." "What's that?" "You must call your daughter. Tell her what you have learned here. Tell her you want to try again." She smiled. "The village has a telephone. It is old and temperamental, but it works. Thomas will show you." Harlan's first instinct was to refuse, to say he'd do it later, back home, when he'd had time to think. But he recognized that instinct for what it was, fear, dressed up as caution. And he'd come too far today to give in to fear now. "All right," he said. "Show me the phone." The telephone sat in a small wooden building that served as the village's connection to the outside world. It was an old rotary model, the kind Harlan remembered from his childhood, and it took Thomas 3 tries to get a dial tone. "Take your time," Thomas said, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the phone. Harlan stared at it for a long moment, trying to remember Sarah's number. He'd written it down once, filed it away somewhere in the cabin. But memory served 10 digits he'd called exactly twice in 15 years, both times awkward and brief. He dialed slowly, each click of the rotary feeling like a small act of courage. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He almost hung up, almost chickened out, but then a voice answered. "Hello?" Not Sarah. A man, probably her husband, Jason. "This is Harlan Briggs," he said. "Sarah's father. Is she available?" A pause, long enough that Harlan thought maybe the connection had dropped. Then, "Mr. Briggs, hang on, let me get her." Another pause, background noise, voices, what sounded like crying. Then Sarah's voice, strained and tired. "Dad, Sarah, I know it's been a while. Dad, I can't talk right now. I'm sorry, I know you never call, and I should, but it's not a good time. Emma's sick, and we're at the hospital," and Harlan's world tilted. "Emma, that's your daughter?" "Yes," Sarah's voice cracked. "My daughter, your granddaughter. She's 6 years old, and she's been fighting leukemia for 8 months. And right now she's in intensive care because the latest treatment isn't working, and I'm barely holding it together. So if you called to make small talk or I'm coming to Denver, Harlan interrupted. Which hospital? What, Dad, you don't have to. Which hospital, Sarah? She told him. He memorized it along with the room. Number, visiting hours, parking information. His mind had shifted into a different gear, the same gear that had kicked in when he found Ayanna dying in the snow. No time for doubt or second-guessing. Just action. I'll be there tomorrow, he said. Maybe the day after, depending on weather. You won't be alone in this, Sarah. Not anymore. Dad, her voice broke completely. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just hold on. I'm coming. He hung up before she could argue, before he could lose his nerve. His hands were shaking. A granddaughter, 6 years old, fighting cancer, and he hadn't known. Had been so wrapped up in his solitude, his grief, his walls, that his own daughter hadn't felt she could tell him. The shame of that hit like a fist to the gut. He stepped outside and found Thomas waiting, reading the situation on Harlan's face immediately. What happened? My granddaughter is dying, Harlan said flatly. 6 years old, leukemia, in intensive care and dies. Denver. I didn't even know she existed until 2 minutes ago. Thomas absorbed this in silence, then nodded once. When do you leave? Now. Soon as I can get to my cabin, pack some things, drive to Denver. The drive is 8 hours in good weather. The roads are still bad from the storms. Thomas thought for a moment. But we have a better way. Joseph has a truck, 4-wheel drive, chains. He can get you to Denver in 6 hours, maybe 5 if the weather holds. And you will not go alone. We will come with you. That's not necessary. It is necessary, Thomas said firmly. You are friend of the people now. When you hurt, we hurt. When you need help, we help. This is not charity. This is family. The word hit Harlan hard. Family. These people he'd known for barely 2 weeks, treating him like kin because he'd done one decent thing in a lifetime of isolation. I don't deserve this, he said quietly. Perhaps not. But you will accept it anyway, because your granddaughter needs you, and you need us. Pride is a luxury you cannot afford right now. Word spread through the village with remarkable speed. Within an hour, a plan had formed. Joseph would drive Harlan to Denver in the tribe's 4-wheel drive truck. Ayanna would come too. She had connections at the hospital, knew people, could help navigate the system. Elena, who had nursing training, would accompany them in case medical advocacy was needed. Thomas would stay behind to manage the village, but would organize prayers and ceremonies for Emma's healing. They loaded the truck with supplies, food, water, blankets, cash from a community fund. Morning Star appeared with a small bundle of herbs, pressed them into Ayanna's hands with whispered instructions. Grandmother Willow came to the truck, placed her hand on Harlan's arm, and spoke words Thomas translated. She says, "Your path has been leading to this moment all along. Saving Ayanna taught you compassion again. Opening your heart here gave you the courage to reach out to your daughter. Now you must be strong for your granddaughter. The mountain has prepared you. Trust in that." They left within 2 hours of Harlan's phone call. The truck handled the rough roads well, chains crunching through snow and ice, Joseph driving with the confidence of someone who'd learned these mountains from birth. Harlan sat in the passenger seat, mind racing, while Ayanna and Elena talked quietly in the back. "Tell me about Sarah," Ayanna said eventually. "I should know, if I'm going to help." So, Harlan told her, about Mary's death when Sarah was 20, how grief had driven them apart. How Sarah had tried to maintain contact, tried to include him in her life, but he'd pushed her away with silence and distance. How she'd stopped trying after a few years, and he'd told himself it was better that way. But it wasn't better, he said. I know that now. I wasted 15 years, because I was too broken to admit I needed help, too proud to accept love. And now my granddaughter is dying, and I've never even met her. Then you will meet her now, Ayanna said simply, and you will be there for your daughter. That is all you can do. Be present, be honest, and offer whatever help you can. The past cannot be changed, but the future remains unwritten. They drove through the afternoon and into the evening, stopping once for gas and food. Harlan called the hospital from a payphone, got connected to Sarah's room. She sounded exhausted but glad he'd called. "We're 4 hours away," he told her. "Maybe less." "How's Emma doing?" "Stable. For now. They're trying a new treatment protocol, but—" Her voice caught. "Dad, I'm scared. I'm so scared." "I know, sweetheart, but you're not alone anymore. We're coming, and we're bringing help. Just hold on." "Who's we?" "Friends. Good people. You'll see." Back in the truck, as they descended from the mountains toward Denver's lights, Harlan found himself thinking about Grandmother Willow's words. "The mountain has prepared you. All of it, finding Ayana, the ceremony, the healing, learning to open his heart again, had been preparation for this moment, for being there when his family needed him most. He'd spent 15 years running from pain, from connection, from the risk of loving and losing. But all that running had just created a different kind of pain. The pain of isolation, of wasted years, of a granddaughter he'd never met. No more running. Whatever happened next, whether Emma recovered or whether God had other plans, Harlan would be there, present, connected, and ready to carry whatever burden needed carrying. They reached the hospital at midnight. The building was huge, modern, intimidating. Harlan stood in the parking lot for a moment, gathering his courage, feeling the weight of 15 years pressing down on him. Then Ayana took his hand. Elena took the other, and Joseph clasped his shoulder in silent support. "You are not alone," Ayana said. "Remember that. Whatever you face in there, you do not face it alone." They walked together through the automatic doors into the bright, fluorescent lobby. A security guard directed them to the pediatric intensive care unit on the 4th floor. The elevator ride felt endless. Harlan's heart hammered against his ribs. The doors opened. Sarah stood in the hallway outside, room 417, and when she saw him, her face crumbled. She ran to him like she was 7 years old again, collided with him hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs, and sobbed into his chest. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. I didn't think you'd care. I didn't think—" "Hush," Harlan said, holding his daughter for the first time in 15 years, feeling his own tears fall. "I'm the one who's sorry. For all of it. For every year I wasted. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving. Whatever you need, however long it takes, I'm here." They stood like that for a long moment, two people, finding their way back to each other across an ocean of lost time. Behind them, Ayana, Elena, and Joseph waited quietly, offering silent support. Finally, Sarah pulled back, wiped her eyes, and seemed to notice the others for the first time. "Who are friends?" Harlan said. "They drove through the night to help. Sarah, this is Ayana, Elena, and Joseph. They're—" He paused, searching for the right words. "They're family." Sarah looked at them, confusion and gratitude warring on her face. "Thank you for bringing him. I don't understand, but thank you. May we see Emma?" Ayana asked gently. "Sometimes the presence of many hearts helps with healing." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "She's sleeping, but yes. Come." She led them to room 417 and opened the door quietly. Inside, a small girl lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors. She was tiny, her head wrapped in a colorful scarf where her hair had been. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, but her face was peaceful in sleep. Harlan's heart broke and mended simultaneously. This was his granddaughter, Emma, 6 years old and fighting for her life. And he would do anything to help her win that fight. He moved to her bedside, sat down carefully, and took her small hand in his. It felt impossibly fragile, like bird bones wrapped in tissue paper. "I'm here, Emma," he whispered. "Your grandpa's here. And I'm not leaving, not ever again." Behind him, Ayana began to pray softly in her native tongue. Elena stood vigil. Joseph kept watch at the door. And Sarah collapsed into a chair and cried with relief, exhaustion, and hope that maybe, just maybe, Everything would be all right. The long night stretched ahead, but for the first time in 15 years, Harlan Briggs was exactly where he needed to be. Emma woke at dawn, her eyes opening slowly to find a stranger sitting beside her bed. She studied Harlan for a long moment, taking in his weathered face, his calloused hands. Holding hers, the beaded bracelet on his wrist. "Are you a cowboy?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Harlan felt his throat tighten. "I am. And I'm your grandpa. I'm sorry I haven't been here before, but I'm here now." Mom said my grandpa lived in the mountains and didn't like people very much. The honesty of it stung, but he couldn't deny the truth. "Your mom was right, but I'm trying to do better." Emma considered this. "I like your bracelet. It's pretty. A friend made it for me. Her name is Ayana." He gestured to where Ayana sat quietly in the corner. "She's here too, with some other friends. They wanted to meet you." Over the next 3 days, the small hospital room became a hub of unlikely community. Ayana brought herbs approved by the doctors and made teas that helped Emma's appetite. Elena coordinated with the medical team, translating complex terminology into terms Sarah could understand, advocating when something didn't seem right. Joseph made runs for food and supplies, keeping everyone fed and comfortable. And Harlan simply stayed. He sat by Emma's bed for hours, telling her stories about thunder and the cattle, about winter storms in the high country, about the barn cat who had never accepted a name. She listened with bright eyes, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts, holding his hand when the pain got bad. Sarah watched all of this with a mixture of gratitude and grief. One evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, she pulled Harlan aside. "Where was this man 15 years ago?" she asked quietly. "Where was this patient, caring father when I needed him?" The question hurt because it was fair. Harlan took a breath, let it out slowly. "He was drowning," he said honestly. "After your mother died, I didn't know how to be anything except broken. And broken people hurt the ones they love without meaning to. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I was wrong." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I needed you, Dad. After Mom died, I needed you so much, but you shut me out, and I didn't know how to reach you. I know, and I'm sorry. I can't fix those years, Sarah. Can't undo the hurt I caused. But I can be here now. I can be the grandfather Emma needs, and the father you deserved all along." He met her eyes. "If you'll let me." She studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "Emma loves you already. She talks about you constantly, her cowboy grandpa who lives in the mountains. You've given her something to fight for, beyond just the treatments and procedures." "She's giving me something too," Harlan said. "Purpose, connection, reasons to keep my heart open instead of closed. That little girl is teaching me how to live again." The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The new treatment protocol was showing promise. Emma's numbers were improving, but Dr. Martinez, the oncologist, was careful not to make promises. "We're seeing positive trends," she told Sarah and Harlan on the 4th day. "But pediatric leukemia is unpredictable. We need to take this one day at a time, one treatment at a time. No guarantees, but there's reason for hope." Hope, such a small word carrying so much weight. That night, Thomas called from the village. Joseph put the phone on speaker so they could all hear. "The whole community is praying for Emma," Thomas said. "Grandmother Willow has performed ceremonies. Morning Star has sent more herbs. We are with you in spirit, even though distance separates us." "Thank you," Harlan said, his voice rough with emotion. "For everything. For bringing me here. For staying. For—" He couldn't finish. "You are family now," Thomas said simply. "This is what family does." After the call ended, Harlan sat in the hospital cafeteria with Ayana, drinking terrible coffee and trying to process everything that had happened in 2 weeks. His entire life had transformed. The solitary cowboy who wanted nothing from anyone now had a daughter he was rebuilding a relationship with, a granddaughter he loved fiercely, and a community of mountain people who treated him like kin. "You look troubled," Ayana observed. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of losing Emma before I've really gotten to know her. Afraid of failing Sarah again. Afraid that maybe I don't know how to be what they need." "None of us know how to be what others need," Ayana said. "We simply try our best and trust that love is enough. You are doing that. You are here, present, engaged. That is what matters. But what if it's not enough? What if Emma doesn't make it?" Ayana was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Then you will grieve with your daughter, and you will help her carry that burden. And Emma will have known, in her final days, that her grandfather loved her. That is not nothing, Harlan. That is everything." The next morning brought unexpected news. Dr. Martinez entered Emma's room with a cautious smile. "We got the latest test results back," she said. "Emma's showing significant improvement. The cancer cells are responding to the treatment better than we hoped. She's not in remission yet, but she's moving in the right direction." Sarah burst into tears. Harlan felt his knees go weak. Emma, who didn't fully understand the implications but recognized her mother's relief, smiled and said, "Does this mean I can go home soon?" "Not yet, Doctor," Martinez said gently. "We need to keep you here for at least another week, maybe 2, to monitor your progress. But you're doing great, Emma. Really great." After the doctor left, Sarah threw her arms around Harlan. "She's going to make it," she whispered. "Dad, she's going to make it." "Maybe," Harlan said, tempering hope with caution learned from 60 years of life. "Let's take it one day at a time, like the doctor said. But yes, this is good news, real good news." That afternoon, Emma was feeling well enough to sit up for longer periods. Harlan had an idea. He pulled out the beaded bracelet Ayana had made him, held it up so Emma could see the intricate patterns. "You like this, right?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "How would you like to learn how to make something like it?" "Ayana could teach you. It's traditional craftwork from her people." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? I could make my own?" Ayana stepped forward, smiling. "I would be honored to teach you. We will start with something simple, maybe a small pouch or a hair tie. The work requires patience and steady hands, but I think you have both." Over the next 2 days, Ayana and Emma worked together on beadwork projects. Elena brought supplies from a craft store: beads, leather cord, needles, pattern guides. Emma's small fingers moved carefully, placing each bead with concentration, creating simple patterns that grew more complex as she learned. The work gave her something to focus on besides the treatments and procedures. It gave her a sense of accomplishment, of creating something beautiful from simple materials. And it connected her to Ayana's culture, to traditions passed down through generations. Harlan watched them work together, the elderly matriarch and the young girl, and felt something shift in his chest. This was family, not just blood, but chosen. People bound together by compassion and mutual care, by showing up when it mattered, by being present through hard times. Jason, Sarah's husband, arrived on the 5th day. Harlan had met him only once before, at the wedding 15 years back, and remembered almost nothing about him. But Jason embraced him like a long-lost father, thanked him for being there, and told him how much it meant to Sarah. "She's talked about you for years," Jason said as they stood in the hallway outside Emma's room. "Wondered where you were, if you were all right, if you still thought about her. This, you being here, it's healing something in her that's been broken a long time." "I've got a lot to make up for," Harlan said. "Maybe, but you're here now. That's what counts." Jason paused. "Emma talks about you constantly, her cowboy grandpa who lives in the mountains with a horse named Thunder. You've become her hero. I'm no hero. To her you are. And right now, that little girl needs all the heroes she can get." On the 7th day, Dr. Martinez delivered the news they'd been praying for. Emma was in remission. The cancer was still there, but barely detectable. She'd need ongoing treatment, regular monitoring, and careful management. But she'd beaten the immediate crisis. She was going to live. The celebration was quiet but profound. Sarah cried. Jason cried. Harlan held Emma gently and told her how proud he was of her. Ayana offered prayers of thanksgiving. Elena organized a small party in the hospital room with balloons and Emma's favorite foods. That evening, as the excitement died down and Emma slept peacefully, Harlan stood at the window, looking out over Denver's lights. Thomas's words echoed in his mind. The mountain has prepared you. All of it had led to this moment. Finding Ayana had taught him compassion. The ceremony had opened his heart. The community had shown him what connection looked like. And all of that had given him the courage to be here when his family needed him most. He thought about the man he'd been 2 weeks ago, solitary, closed off, convinced that isolation was safety. That man seemed like a stranger now. Or maybe not a stranger. Maybe just someone who'd been lost and was finally finding his way home. "You look thoughtful," Sarah said, coming to stand beside him. "Just thinking about how fast things can change," Harlan said. 2 weeks ago, I was alone in my cabin, convinced that's how I'd die. Now I'm here, and Emma's in remission, and I've got a second chance at being your father. Do you regret it? The 15 years alone?" He considered the question honestly. "I regret the hurt I caused you. Regret missing so much of your life, of Emma's life. But the solitude itself, I think I needed it, for a while. Needed time to figure out how to keep breathing after losing your mother. I just stayed in it too long, let it become a prison instead of a refuge." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture so familiar and yet so foreign after all the years apart. "I forgive you, Dad, for all of it. But don't waste any more time, okay? Emma needs you. I need you. And I think maybe you need us too." "I do," Harlan said simply. "More than I knew." They stood together at the window, watching the city lights sparkle in the darkness, while behind them Emma slept and dreamed of mountains and horses and a grandfather who'd come back from the wilderness to be part of her life. The worst was over. Emma would recover. The family was healing. But there was still work to be done. Bridges to fully rebuild, relationships to nurture back to health. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, there was peace. And that was enough. Emma was discharged 2 weeks after Harlan's arrival. The doctors set up an aggressive outpatient treatment schedule, chemotherapy, radiation, regular monitoring. Sarah and Jason's house would become a medical hub, with visiting nurses and equipment and protocols to follow. It was overwhelming, but manageable. Together, they could handle it. The night before Emma left the hospital, Harlan gathered everyone in her room. Sarah, Jason, Ayana, Elena, and Joseph. He'd been thinking about something for days, and now felt like the right time to say it. "I want to make a proposal," he started, feeling suddenly nervous despite the friendly faces around him. "Sarah, you and Jason are going to have your hands full these next months. Emma needs constant care, and you both work. I'd like to help. Not just visit, but really help. If you'll have me, I'd like to stay in Denver for a while. Get an apartment nearby, or maybe stay in your guest room if that's all right. Be here for whatever you need, driving to appointments, sitting with Emma, cooking meals, whatever." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, you don't have to." "I want to," Harlan interrupted gently. "I've missed too many years already. I'm not missing any more. Not if you'll let me stay." "Of course we'll let you stay," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "God, Dad. Of course." Jason nodded agreement. "We'd be grateful for the help, and Emma would love having you around." "What about your ranch?" Ayana asked practically. "Your cattle? Your home?" Harlan had thought about that too. "I called Sam Garrett in Cedar Ridge. He's got a nephew looking for work, good kid who knows ranching. He'll look after the place, the cattle, Thunder. Check on things until I can get back." He paused. "Assuming I do get back, might be I need to make some permanent changes. Sell the ranch, move to Denver. I don't know yet, but right now my place is here." That night, alone in the apartment Joseph had helped him rent, Harlan called Thomas. The old man answered on the third ring. "How is Emma?" Thomas asked immediately. "In remission. Going home tomorrow." "It's a miracle, Thomas. A real miracle. The spirits heard our prayers. Grandmother Willow will be pleased." A pause. And you? How are you? Different, Harlan said honestly. Changed. I'm staying in Denver to help care for Emma. Don't know for how long. Might be permanent. That is good. That is right. Thomas's voice was warm with approval. You have found your path, Harlan. Not the path you expected, but the one you needed. The mountain brought you to us so we could bring you back to your family. That was always the purpose. I know that now, and Thomas, I can't thank you enough. You and Ayanna, the whole community. You saved me as surely as I saved her. That is how healing works. We save each other. Remember that. They talked for another hour about the ranch, the Divrut, village, plans for the future. Thomas promised to visit once Emma was stronger, to bring grandmother Willow if she was able to travel. They would maintain the connection forged in crisis and compassion. After the call, Harlan sat in his small apartment and felt the weight of his new life settling around him. Everything was different now. His days would be structured around doctor appointments and treatments, family meals and Emma's schoolwork. No more solitary mornings watching the sun rise over the peaks. No more long rides into the high country with only thunder for company. He waited for regret to hit, for the pull of his old life to make him question this choice, but it never came. What he felt instead was peace, purpose, the sense of being exactly where he belonged. The next morning, he helped Emma into Jason's car, carrying her small suitcase and the beadwork projects she'd completed in the hospital. She wore the vest Ayanna had made for him over her hospital gown, drowning in it, but refusing to take it off. It's magic, she told him seriously. It made you brave enough to come find me. Now it's making me brave enough to go home. Harlan's chest tightened with love so fierce it hurt. You're the bravest person I know, Emma. Magic or no magic. At Sarah and Jason's house, they got Emma settled in her room. The space had been reorganized, medical equipment positioned discreetly, a comfortable chair for whoever was sitting with her, art supplies and books within easy reach. Ayanna had prepared herbs and teas, left detailed instructions for their use. Elena had coordinated with the home health service, making sure everyone knew the protocol. That first night, Harlan sat in the chair beside Emma's bed while she slept. Sarah brought him dinner on a tray, sat with him for a while. This feels strange, she said quietly. Having you here, good strange, but strange. For me too, Harlan admitted, but I think I'm starting to understand what family is. Supposed to feel like. Not perfect, not always easy, but present, connected. That's all I ever wanted, Dad. Just for you to be here. I'm here now, he said, and I'm not leaving. That's a promise. She kissed his forehead, something she hadn't done since she was a little girl, and left him to his vigil. Harlan sat in the dim light, watching Emma breathe, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. A dying woman in the snow, 200 warriors at dawn, a ceremony that cracked open his heart. A phone call that changed everything. The mountain had prepared him, just as Grandmother Willow said, and now he was ready for whatever came next. The first month was hard. Emma's treatment schedule was aggressive chemotherapy twice a week, radiation, endless blood draws and scans. She lost what remained of her hair, struggled with nausea and fatigue, had days where she couldn't get out of bed, but through it all, Harlan was there. He learned the medical terminology, understood the treatment protocols, knew which symptoms required immediate attention and which could wait. He sat through the hard appointments, held Emma's hand during procedures, distracted her with stories when the pain got bad, and slowly, gradually, Emma improved. The cancer markers continued to drop. Her energy returned in small increments. She started smiling more, laughing at Harlan's stories about the barn cat's hunting failures and Thunder's stubborn refusal to cross shallow streams. One evening, 6 weeks after Emma came home, Sarah found Harlan in the kitchen preparing dinner. He'd taken over most of the cooking, simple, hearty meals that reminded Sarah of her childhood before her mother died. "You're humming," she observed. Harlan paused, realized she was right. He'd been humming an old tune Mary used to sing, didn't even notice. "You seem happy, Dad, really happy." Not just content or okay, but happy. He thought about that while he stirred the pot of stew. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again after your mother passed. Thought that part of me died with her. But it was just sleeping, waiting for a reason to wake up. Emma's reason enough, Sarah said softly. Emma, yes, but also you. Getting to know Jason. Being part of a family again. Even the hard days, and there've been plenty, feel different now. Feel like they matter. He met her eyes. I was existing before, Sarah. Just going through the motions. Now I'm living. There's a difference. That weekend, Thomas and a delegation from the village came to visit. Grandmother Willow made the journey despite her age, insisted on meeting Emma and seeing how the healing had progressed. They brought gifts, more beadwork supplies, traditional foods, herbs for continued healing. Emma was shy at first, overwhelmed by the visitors, but Grandmother Willow knelt beside her with difficulty, took her small hands, and spoke in English for the child's benefit. "You are a warrior," the old woman said. "Young in years, but strong in spirit. The sickness came for you, but you fought back. That takes courage many adults do not have. I am honored to know you." Emma straightened, pride blooming across her face. "Mr. Harlan, my grandpa, he says, I'm brave like the mountain people. He is right. And when you are stronger, you must come visit us. See the mountains where your grandfather learned to open his heart again. Learn our ways, our stories. You are connected to us now, through him. That makes you family." After the visit, Emma was energized in a way Harlan hadn't seen since before she got sick. She talked constantly about visiting the village, learning more beadwork, meeting the other children. The future had become something to look forward to instead of something to fear. "You gave her hope," Sarah told Harlan that night. "Not just medical hope, but life hope. Something to dream about, beyond just surviving." "The mountain people did that," Harlan corrected. "I just made the connection." "You made all the connections, Dad. You brought these people into our lives, showed Emma there's a whole world out there waiting for her. That matters." 2 months after Emma's discharge, Dr. Martinez delivered the news they'd been praying for. Emma was in full remission. The cancer was undetectable. She'd need monitoring for years, regular checkups and scans, but barring any setbacks, she was going to be fine. The celebration that night was joyful and tearful in equal measure. Jason grilled steaks. Sarah made Emma's favorite cake. Harlan called Thomas and put him on speaker so the whole village could hear the good news. Ayana, Elena, and Joseph drove up from the village to join the party. In the midst of the celebration, Emma climbed into Harlan's lap, something she'd started doing regularly, and hugged him tight. "I love you, Grandpa," she said simply. The words hit Harlan with the force of a physical blow. He wrapped his arms around his granddaughter and felt tears stream down his weathered cheeks. "I love you too, Emma. More than I can say." Later that night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Harlan stood in the backyard looking up at the stars. They were harder to see here in the city, dimmed by light pollution. But they were there. The same stars that shone over his cabin in the mountains, over the village in the valley, over every place that mattered. Sarah joined him, handed him a beer, stood beside him in comfortable silence. "What are you thinking about?" she finally asked. "How close I came to missing all of this," Harlan said. "If I hadn't followed those tracks into the storm, if I'd turned back when I wanted to, if I'd refused the ceremony or declined to make that phone call, I'd still be alone in my cabin, convincing myself that solitude was enough. But you didn't turn back. You followed through on every hard choice, every moment that required courage. That's who you are, Dad. A man who does what's right even when it costs him. Maybe, or maybe I'm just a man who got lucky, who was given a second chance and had enough sense to take it." "Either way," Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder, "I'm glad you're here." "Me too," Harlan said. "Me too." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human suffering and joy alike. But here on Earth, in this small yard in Denver, a family had been made whole, and that was miracle enough. 6 months later, Harlan stood on the ridge above his cabin and watched the sun rise over the Colorado peaks. The air was sharp with early autumn, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Below him, the cabin looked smaller than he remembered, more weathered, but still solid, still home. He'd sold most of the cattle, kept just Thunder and 2 others for companionship. Sam Garrett's nephew had done good work maintaining the place, but it was clear the ranch needed its owner back. Not full-time those days. Were over, but regularly enough to keep things running. Thunder whinnied from the pasture, recognizing him despite the months apart. Harlan walked down the slope, and the old gelding trotted over, pushing his nose into Harlan's chest in greeting. "Missed you too, old son," Harlan murmured, scratching behind the horse's ears. He'd come back to the mountains for a week, needing to see the place, to check on things, to remind himself of the man he'd been before everything changed. Sarah and Emma had stayed in Denver. Emma had school, and Sarah had work, but they'd be joining him in 2 days for a visit, their first trip to the ranch as a reunited family. The cabin felt strange after months away, familiar but foreign, like visiting a museum of his former life. He lit a fire, made coffee, stood at the window where he'd stood that morning when 200 warriors appeared on the ridge. It felt like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to someone else. But the beaded bracelet on his wrist proved it was real. The vest hanging by the door, the photograph Sarah had given him now displayed on the mantel beside the old picture of Mary. Evidence that he'd walked through fire and come out transformed. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Thomas stood on the porch, staff in hand, smiling. "Welcome home," the old man said. They sat by the fire and talked for hours, catching up on 6 months of life. The village was thriving. Ayanna had recovered fully, back to leading ceremonies and teaching the young ones. Grandmother Willow had passed peacefully in her sleep 2 months back, satisfied that she'd lived to see Harlan and his family reunited. "She spoke of you at the end," Thomas said. "Said you were proof that healing was possible at any age, that it was never too late to choose love over fear. She considered you one of her greatest successes." The words sat heavy in Harlan's chest. He'd only met the old woman once, but she'd seen straight through him, recognized what he needed before he knew it himself. "I wish I could have thanked her," Harlan said. "She knew. Your life, your choices since that day, that was thanks enough." Thomas sipped his coffee. "So what now? Do you stay here? Return to Denver? Try to do both?" "Both, I think. Emma's in remission, doing great, back to being a regular kid. Sarah and Jason have their routine down. They don't need me every day anymore. But I can't go back to the way it was before, alone all the time, cut off from everyone. So I'm thinking 3 weeks a month in Denver, 1 week here. Keep the ranch going, but not at the expense of family." "That is wisdom," Thomas approved. "Balance. Not too much isolation, not too much connection. Finding the middle path." "Learned that from you," Harlan said. "From all of you. You showed me what community looks like, what family can be." They spent the afternoon riding the fence lines, checking on Thunder and the cattle, making sure everything was secure before winter came. The physical work felt good, familiar, grounding. This was still part of who Harlan was, the cowboy, the rancher, the man who understood land and animals. But it wasn't all of who he was anymore. That evening, as Thomas prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You saved Ayanna's life that day in the storm," he said. "But I think perhaps she saved yours as well. Not from death, but from half-living. Sometimes we need to be needed. Need to be reminded why connection matters." After Thomas left, Harlan sat on his porch and watched the stars emerge. The same stars he'd watched from Sarah's backyard, but brighter here, undimmed by city lights. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, the loneliness that had preceded it, the chance encounter that changed everything, the courage it took to stay open when every instinct screamed to close back down. His phone rang. Sarah, video calling so Emma could say goodnight. "Hi, Grandpa." Emma's face filled the screen, bright and happy and healthy. "Are you at the ranch? Can I see Thunder?" Harlan turned the phone so she could see the horse grazing in the pasture. Emma squealed with delight, made him promise Thunder would be there when they visited. They talked for 10 minutes about school, about the beadwork project she was finishing, about her upcoming birthday party. After they hung up, Harlan sat in the gathering darkness and felt the full weight of his transformation. He'd walked into that storm 6 months ago as one man and emerged as another. The journey had required letting go of grief's comfortable numbness, accepting help when he'd spent years refusing it, and choosing love even when it meant risking pain. He thought about the hook, the story that had started with a dying woman and 200 warriors at dawn, how it had seemed so simple at the time: do what's right, accept the consequences, move on. But it had been the beginning of everything, the first step on a path he hadn't known he needed to walk. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness really does change everything, not just for the person being helped, but for the helper too. Harlan had saved Ayana's life, yes, but in doing so, he'd saved his own, had learned that peace doesn't come from isolation, but from connection. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to love despite it. The night grew cold. Harlan went inside, added logs to the fire, and sat in his chair with one of Louis L'Amour's books. But tonight, the words didn't hold his attention. His mind kept drifting to Sarah and Emma, to Thomas and Ayana, to all the people who had become his family through acts of compassion and grace. In 2 days, they'd all be here together. Sarah and Emma would see the ranch for the first time. Emma would meet Thunder and learn to ride. They'd sit around this fire and tell stories and build memories to replace the 15 years of silence. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer frightening. There would be hard days still. Emma's cancer required vigilant monitoring, relationships needed constant tending, life had a way of throwing curves. But Harlan wouldn't face those challenges alone. He had family now, had community, had learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. He closed the book, stoked the fire one last time, and prepared for bed. Through the window, he could see the ridge where the warriors had stood that dawn morning. It was empty now, but the memory remained vivid. The moment when everything changed, when a solitary cowboy learned that sometimes the mountain brings us exactly what we need, even when we don't know we need it. Harlan climbed into bed and closed his eyes, his last thought before sleep a simple prayer of gratitude, for second chances, for family, for a dying woman in the snow who became the catalyst for his salvation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight there was peace, and that was more than enough.